If you're watching this video, you've probably heard the recent news of Titanfall 3 potentially being cancelled, or maybe you're just here because you're a fan of Titanfall or Apex Legends. Recently, the series has been in a massive decline, and I wanted to go through the sad legacy this series has left behind, and how EA does what EA does best, leaving one of the best series in FPS history to rot with nowhere left to go. I can't recall any other FPS series with as much of a decline as much as Titanfall, leaving behind one of the saddest legacies in all of gaming, so join me as I go through the sad legacy and decline of Titanfall.
Caution, Titanfall approaching battlefield.
Setting up stage, before we begin, you do need to know the roots of how Titanfall even became to be. And before a fall, there must be a rise, and this rise is what allowed Titanfall to even become a thing in the first place. You see, during the mid-2010s, the FPS genre was in a sharp, steady decline. The genre had long been stale, and while Call of Duty and Battlefield titles had been commercially well received, there was just growing pains with the yearly gameplay loop. Players were fed up, the games were just becoming stale. You can only do the same things before it starts to become stale. Modern Warfare 2 and Modern Warfare 3 really did at the time feel like pretty much the same game. It's just that a few things were updated here and there. The yearly Call of Duty releases weren't the only thing that had gone stale either. The widely received negative reception of 2014's Battlefield Hardline left players wondering if DICE even knew what they wanted for Battlefield anymore. And that's not even beginning to mention the Tom Clancy series that had reached a point of stagnation with no release in quite a few years. Many players had simply given up hope. Let's face it, the era of military sim shooters had run its course and people just wanted something new, something different. Even the behemoth Call of Duty series was facing backlash over 2013's Call of Duty Ghost. I recall during this time of stagnation, people simply resorted going back to 2012's Black Ops 2 or Battlefield 3 as people just enjoyed what was fun. So when EA announced a new project, a completely new IP, on June 10th, 2013, many gamers were eager to see where this would lead. We got our first glimpse at a futuristic setting, superpowered soldiers running on walls, giant mechs falling from the sky, and many players, including myself, were intrigued to see what this would shape up to be. This could very well have led up to what would be a massive shift in the FPS genre as a whole. Many players were also excited for other reasons behind the scene. You see, the same team that led Titanfall was made up of many ex-Infinity Ward employees. These were the same guys behind 2009's Modern Warfare 2, a game that at the time absolutely dominated the online space and many Xboxes around the world. You would be hard-pressed to find someone who didn't own a copy of Modern Warfare 2. I remember back in the day I owned a copy of Modern Warfare 2. I can't remember how I got it, I can't remember where I found it, it was just there, and I didn't even have a PS3, but that just kind of goes to show that everyone had Modern Warfare 2. I think I found it at a thrift shop and it was like $5, and that just kind of goes to show that everyone had a copy of Modern Warfare 2. With a team like this, many people had felt a sense of confidence knowing that this new studio known as Respawn Entertainment had passion and, most importantly, the experience needed. The best of the best were working on Titanfall, and they were ready to show the world what they had been working on since 2010. On February 11th of 2014, EA had officially shown the world that they were ready and that a beta playtest of the game would be open for all Xbox and PC players just a few short days later. The Titan gameplay loop had really hooked players in, and the fast-paced nature of the game really was something that had never been seen before. The campaign-like nature in multiplayer really felt like it was the beginning of bridging the two modes together, creating a world that people could really invest themselves in. Leading up to the game's release, the team at Respawn were still gearing up for launch, but the development for this was very troubled. But thankfully, Microsoft had given their team their full support. At the time, the new generation of consoles had just launched, and Sony was winning the console war. To help support the studio and help Microsoft in turn, they'd made a deal to give customers looking to buy a brand new Xbox a free copy of Titanfall. Not a bad deal. On top of this, a free month of Xbox Live was also given. Now, one thing you need to know about the original Titanfall launch was that the team originally did want the game to release on Sony consoles, but unlike Microsoft, they just couldn't get the support that was needed. In order to obtain some PS4 dev kits at the time, you needed to be a really high-class publisher. One would think that the people behind one of the biggest games in the world would be able to get these consoles, but no, they were not able to get their hands on these. Respawn were simply told that they had no new information at this time and basically that they could shove it. Sony, however, were willing to work to a certain extent. The team were suggested to work on Titanfall on the PlayStation Vita. Yeah, the same PlayStation Vita that could barely handle Black Ops at 30 FPS, and a console that would later fail and be Sony's last entry into the handheld landscape. March 11, 2014 marked the release of Titanfall on PC and Xbox One. The last generation's Xbox 360 did get a release as well, but they would have to wait until April 8th of 2014 to get in on the action. One thing that many players noticed was the interesting exclusion of a single-player mode. There was technically a single-player, but it served more as an introduction tutorial to the series, meant to be played before getting you into multiplayer. Overall, player reception was positive, but as time went on, there were some glaring issues. Post-launch support for the game wasn't the very best at first, but over time, in retrospect, this could be looked back on as one of the best post-launch supports for an FPS game ever. The game's first major update arrived after the announcement of its Season Pass. This would ensure that the game would at the very least get 3 major updates. Expedition released on May 15th, 2014 with the map Swamplands, Wargame, and Runoff. Frontier Edge, the second major DLC update, included Dig Site, Haven, and Export. And lastly, IMC Rising, the game's final major update, included Zone 18, Sandtrap, and Backwater. This concluded the game's main lifecycle on September 9th of 2014. For comparison, Call of Duty had 4 seasons, and each season had 4 multiplayer maps and a extra co-op survival map for its Extinction Zombies game mode. And this would be the end for most online FPS games. Once they had run their season, it's pretty much over for the game. But Titanfall still had not just 1, but 2 aces up its sleeve. Update 8 marked what many people knew back then as Titanfall 2.0. Yes, I know that Titanfall 2 is its own game mode, but the content included in this update would provide players with content for a very, very long time. Frontier Defense was a 4-player co-op wave-based PvE survival mode. This added a whole new layer to its existing content and provided many players with a good way to play with your buddies on a fun night. It wasn't zombies, but for what it's worth, a completely free update that many players weren't even expecting, it was a very welcome addition. Ranked ships were also added, and this is the game's first proper ranked mode and gave hardcore players something to properly grind for. This update also added new OS voice lines, giving players the option to customize their Titans, and 2 entire new game modes known as Marked for Death and Deadly Ground. But remember how I said there was one last major update? Well, on the 1-year anniversary on March 11th of 2015, all DLC map packs were officially marked free for all players for life. In my opinion, this was a great send-off to the game and is how all live service games should go if they are no longer going to support their game. Titanfall 1 is best remembered as ambitious, and it tried many things other FPS titles were too scared of trying. In many ways, Titanfall 1 changed the future of FPS titles to come. And Titanfall 1 marked the shift of an era. Milsim was gone, and the future was now with advanced movement and enhanced combat. Titanfall marked a change, and it was only just getting started. Just a few short months after the release of Titanfall 1, Call of Duty had announced their direct futuristic warfare competitive title. Given the success of Titanfall 1, it was only natural to continue and capitalize. EA even thought that the game was a bigger success than anticipated. The one major glaring issue, however, was its player base. As Sony kept leading in the console wars this generation, it was just too big of a leap to notice. Many PlayStation players could only look in on the fun that everyone on Xbox was having. I remember as a kid, the only times I could play Titanfall 1 was by going to the Walmart kiosk where they had an Xbox One and a copy of Titanfall running. And while it was fun, the divide in player base was just too big to notice. No matter what way you looked at it, Respawn was missing a big demographic by not having the original Titanfall on Sony consoles. And rather than port the original game to the PS4, they looked forward to the future in a sequel. This was only the beginning of Titanfall 2. Remember how Titanfall 1's anniversary led to all content in the game being marked free for all players? Well, EA had one other surprise up its sleeve. Only a day later, they announced they were working on the next installment in the Titanfall universe. Titanfall 2 would be coming to the Xbox, PC, and yes, even the PS4. March 12th was a bittersweet day. They were sending a message that Titanfall 2 was officially at the end of its life, but that more was coming soon. And soon it did, as the world was shown its first look with the teaser releasing on April 11th and a gameplay trailer shown later on June 12th. One thing during this time that needs to be absolutely taken into consideration was the competition that Titanfall 2 was going up against. In terms of futuristic shooters, player reception to Titanfall 2 was absolutely positive. Meanwhile, its competition for the year wasn't looking so hot. Infinite Warfare was Call of Duty's answer to Titanfall 1. The first for the series for Infinity Ward took players to the far future and was the biggest competition to Titanfall at the time. Thankfully though, both games held public betas that allowed players to get their hands on both titles before deciding on a purchase. On top of this, EA also announced that all DLC for the game this year, including map packs and future content, would be free for all players. At the time, Call of Duty was still charging $50 for its season pass, making players shift towards Titanfall for the year. The team were hoping that this approach would make players more satisfied with their full price package, and you know what? It worked. Many players decided that Titanfall simply offered the better value and the better package. This was a huge moment for many people. The launch of the beta really made people lean towards Titanfall, and Call of Duty players were enjoying a completely different game, and it showed. Even me, who had pretty much played nothing but Call of Duty since 2010, was contemplating getting this game or Infinite Warfare. Overall though, Titanfall simply just gave way more enjoyment. And not just that, Call of Duty for 2016 had simply made a massive blunder with Infinite Warfare being one of the most disliked games in all of its COD history. There was just one glaring issue, and one that many people blame on Titanfall 2's downfall. And this was simply the fact that EA didn't let Titanfall blossom into what it could have been. We already know that Call of Duty was its main competition, but something absolutely detrimental to Titanfall was the fact that EA were essentially competing with themselves. Just a mere 3 days after the beta for Titanfall 2, it competed with... The timing on this could not have been worse. While still under the same company, they were very much not the same developers. On top of being pitted against Call of Duty, it also had to compete against Battlefield 1. And to make things worse, Battlefield 1 beta would just happen 3 short days after Titanfall 2's beta had concluded. To put things into perspective, this is what the timetables look like. Battlefield 1 released on October 21st, Titanfall 2 had released on October 28th, and Infinite Warfare released on November 4th, all a mere few weeks apart from one another. The big three for the year were up against each other, and it did not look good for Titanfall. This was one of the biggest things that really killed the potential growth of the game and can only really be called a really unfortunate launch. Now more than ever, the player base for the game was split. On top of this, you gotta remember Fortnite had not yet blown up, and arguably Fortnite being one of the biggest reasons for crossplay even being a thing, everyone was locked on their own consoles. You couldn't just play with your Xbox friends if you were on PC or PS4 like you can today. EA had decided that despite the great reception the players had, it was ultimately deemed a commercial failure. What's even more confusing is that on September 29th, 2016, the game was officially confirmed to have gone gold. Going gold, for people who don't know, refers to the final touches being put on a game and being deemed ready to release. This version of the game is what's printed to stores and sent out to shelves. So for close to a month, they were essentially just sitting on this game ready to be played, but couldn't be released due to the time frame that EA had wanted it to release in. It really does need to be stated just how much EA was setting this game up for failure. So how did the game's life cycle go? Well, going on to the next part, I do just want to give my own 2 cents. In the end, I did end up getting both Infinite Warfare and Titanfall. I enjoyed Titanfall genuinely a lot more this year and barely ended up playing Infinite Warfare at all. And while I don't have any proof of this, I think Activision did realize just how much of a failure Infinite Warfare was. But ultimately, they couldn't do anything. They already sold the deluxe editions and they already sold their season passes. So they had to fulfill on their word and deliver 4 seasons worth of content. And for me personally, one of the biggest reasons for switching to Titanfall was overall the better playability of the game. For some reason on this game in particular, Infinite Warfare, it just seems like I really couldn't compete. Almost as if the game servers were going up against me. The game just genuinely felt bad to play. I think they knew that Infinite Warfare would not do kindly after the backlash of Advanced Warfare, so it's just my personal theory that Infinite Warfare was using the absolute cheapest servers imaginable. Titanfall 2, on the other hand, had some of the best buttery smooth gameplay I've ever felt on the other hand. However, longtime Titanfall fans were mixed. Out of the 6 main multiplayer maps that were added over the course of the year, 5 were remasters from Titanfall 1. The overhaul of the game's gameplay was enough to make the games and maps distinct from the original, but longtime fans had criticized the use of old maps that they had played just a few short years ago. However, to most PlayStation players, these were a welcome addition since they never really got to experience them. Frontier Defense was also announced to be coming back, giving players a free additional game mode, but strangely enough, support for the game was seemingly cut off abruptly after the 11th main update and development on Titanfall 2 had concluded. And this brings us to our next chapter. As EA cut off support for Titanfall 2, many fans wondered if the fabled Titanfall 3 would finally be in development. Fast forwarding to 2025 and current day, we know that Respawn had just cancelled a multiplayer FPS title. At the time of recording, this was just earlier this week, but the details of this title are not yet known. It's rumored that the title cancelled was actually a Star Wars game, but many others think that Titanfall 3 was canned and may never see the light of day. There are a few things we do know, however. Titanfall 3 was 100% in development, but instead was canned for... In 2017, a free-to-play battle royale game known as Fortnite absolutely blew up the FPS scene. And Fortnite paved the way for many of the things we have today. Crossplay as we know it, that's thanks to Fortnite. Battle Pass system, you can thank Fortnite for making it popular. Battle Royale games blowing up during this time as a whole, Fortnite, and, well, PUBG once again. And unfortunately, as the story goes, Fortnite may very well be the reason why Titanfall 3 was cancelled. It's believed that at one point Titanfall 3 was being worked on, but EA quickly shifted focus upon seeing the success that Fortnite had. They decided to retool their Titanfall project into a game set in the Titanfall universe known as Apex Legends. The inspiration was apparent. Even in the launch trailer, you could see the legend known as Pathfinder using the Havoc weapon from Titanfall. A couple other weapons directly tooled from Titanfall 2 were also in this game. Pathfinder's grapple ability was also directly pulled from the pilot's grapple. And if you remember anything about Apex, it kinda just came out of nowhere. Content creators did most of the pushing for this game as they were flown out by EA to partake and help announce this game. They were also paid to play the game on livestream, so most of the advertising came from word of mouth on Twitch. However, modders quickly noted one thing upon going into the game's files. Many, and I mean many, references to Titanfall 3 and pilots were found within the game's files.
Stand by for Titanfall. Caution. Titanfall approaching battlefield.
Titan!
Adversary over here.
There were even voice lines directly referring to Titanfall and pilots directly. On top of this, concept art from the Apex Legends bared a striking resemblance to the pilots of Titanfall. As a Titanfall fan myself, as much as I hate to admit it, it very much looks like whatever Titanfall project was being worked on by Respawn became and morphed into Apex Legends as we know today. And to make things even worse, on top of this, it didn't really help that Apex Legends became more popular than Titanfall. EA seemingly stopped caring and stopped supporting Titanfall altogether. EA had simply forgotten about the core of Apex Legends and Titanfall fans were left in the dust. And in 2025, there's barely any news of a potential third game in the franchise. And that leaves us to the end. As it stands now, Apex Legends still has players to keep it active, but very much has a huge cheating problem. It doesn't just stop at Apex Legends though, it also extends to Titanfall 1 and Titanfall 2. Titanfall 1 suffered many DDoS attacks, making its PC servers unplayable, and instead of taking action and fixing it, they decided to just take the easy way out and remove the game from all storefronts altogether, delisting it entirely. If you paid for the game on PC originally all those years ago, well, you're just simply out of luck. It's not playable anymore. Titanfall 2 also suffers from DDoS attacks and makes the game severely laggy, at some points even unplayable during some parts of the day. It's believed that the culprit of these DDoS attacks come from disgruntled Titanfall fans who are angry that the publisher had simply forgotten about them and instead is focusing their efforts on Apex Legends. And as we stand now, this game carries a legacy as one of the best multiplayer FPS games at the height of 2016. But being forgotten as a whole is just too harsh, as Apex wouldn't exist without Titanfall. In some ways, even Titanfall 2 is unplayable. I decided to revisit this game in 2025 on PC because I don't have a console anymore, and I was immediately met with some issues. I have a newer PC, a 14th gen Intel Core i9 CPU, and anything past the 10th or 11th gen on Intel simply refuses to connect to the game servers for some reason. This is a known bug that EA unfortunately never fixed, so the game is just unplayable unless you patch your PC with a variable that was left for fans to find. The fans did eventually find a fix, and it's now playable once you patch your PC. And I honestly think this does hurt the player base on PC by quite a bit. If you have a newer Intel CPU and you aren't really that good with tinkering on your PC, you're just honestly probably just going to uninstall the game, calling it a day because it just doesn't work. Even on quick play, it took me a pretty long time to find a game, all things considered. Around 9 minutes or so, but it eventually did start. There was a couple other times where it took me about 10 minutes to get back into another server, but that's about it. At least the game is technically playable. As mentioned before, Titanfall 3 is believed to be cancelled, or at the very least a title that Respawn had previously been working on has been canned. We also know that Respawn were working on a Apex Legends crossover Titanfall game that only was known as Titanfall Legends, and that EA is very aware of the fanbase Titanfall holds, continuing to update the playlist to Titanfall 2 early last year around the series' anniversary. As things are today, it's currently March 9th at the time of recording. The series will have officially its anniversary in just a few short days, so who knows, maybe by the time you see this, a Titanfall 3 has already been announced, and maybe it's just another year of no news once more. I think now more than ever we need a Titanfall 3. The FPS genre is somewhat starting to reach a point of staleness once more. Most FPS titles in the sphere today take place in modern day and don't really have advanced combat or movement, and we don't always need futuristic shooters, but take a look at where we are today. Siege, Fortnite, Call of Duty, all games that have kind of gotten stale as of the last few years. Maybe it's time to give the future one more try, and in an era now more than ever where there are no futuristic shooters on the market, this would be the perfect time for Titanfall to return to shake things up just like it did back in 2016. But for now, this is the sad legacy that Titanfall has left behind. As a fan of the series, I can only hope we get news soon, but only time will tell. If you enjoyed the video and made it this far, let me know. I'm genuinely curious to see how many people made it to the end. And if you're feeling super nice today, why not leave a sub or a like? This has been Semtech, ejecting from Titanfall. And hey, if this video did come out on March 11th, happy birthday, Titanfall. Here's to hoping this year's a good one.